This is the moment they always said would never come. For nearly a decade, Donald Trump moved through politics like a man coated in armor. Impeachment slid off him, indictments only made his base louder. Civil judgments were stalled, appealed, and buried under legal maneuvering. It felt as if consequences existed for everyone except him. But this morning, Saturday, January 24th, 2026, that illusion finally broke. The protective layer burned away. What is unfolding in New York City right now has thrown the American presidency into outright disorder. A New York State Supreme Court judge has issued an order for immediate enforcement of the civil fraud judgment against the Trump Organization. This is not a warning shot. This is not a negotiation tactic. This is a seizure order. At this very moment, the New York City Sheriff's Office is preparing to serve foreclosure and asset seizure notices on some of the most recognizable pieces of Trump's empire. We are talking about 40 Wall Street. We are talking about the commercial sections of Trump Tower. Sources even suggest the private jet may be included. And the obvious question is why now, while he is sitting in the Oval Office? The answer leads straight back to the financial shock we discussed yesterday. The Japanese bond market collapse triggered a global liquidity crunch, and it has already taken its first major casualty: the insurance group backing Trump's massive civil fraud appeal bond. When the Tokyo markets imploded, the reinsurance firms behind that bond suffered instant balance sheet damage. They pulled their support. The court gave Trump a 24-hour emergency window to replace it. He couldn't. Campaign costs, legal battles, and frozen credit markets left him without the cash. The stay was lifted, the legal shield vanished. For the first time in U.S. history, a sitting president is now facing the forced liquidation of his private business empire by a state government openly hostile to him. The Secret Service is reportedly intense negotiations with local law enforcement over access to Trump-owned buildings. White House lawyers are scrambling to get the Supreme Court involved, and Trump himself is said to be furious beyond control, even floating the idea of using federal authority or the National Guard to protect his properties. This is capitalism crashing into constitutional law in real time. To understand why the sheriff is moving today, you have to understand the financial mechanism that snapped overnight. Remember the $464 million civil fraud judgment from 2024 brought by Letitia James. Trump appealed it, which meant to avoid immediate asset seizure, he had to post a massive bond guaranteeing payment if he lost. An insurance firm stepped in and backed it. That bond acted like a dam, holding back floodwaters for 2 years. Then the Japanese bond market collapsed. Trillions in liquidity vanished from the global system in hours as the yen carry trade unraveled. According to leaked financial reports, the reinsurers standing behind Trump's bond were deeply exposed to Japanese commercial debt. When Tokyo fell, their balance sheets imploded late Friday night. Either regulators or internal risk teams forced them to pull coverage immediately. They notified the New York court they could no longer secure Trump's judgment. In most cases, defendants get weeks to find replacement bonds, but not here. The judge ruled that given Trump's shaky liquidity and global financial instability, there would be no grace period. If Trump truly had billions, he could pay now. If not, assets had to be locked down before markets destroyed their value. So, the order was signed. Immediate seizure. Donald Trump effectively received a financial margin call on his entire empire and failed it. Now comes the dismantling. Letitia James is not interested in the golf courses. They are messy, hard to sell, and often lose money. She is going after the cash-producing trophy assets. The first target is 40 Wall Street, the signature skyscraper in Manhattan's financial district. But there is a twist. Trump does not own the land. He owns a ground lease. Those leases can be sold or voided in default situations, making the building both valuable and vulnerable. Losing 40 Wall Street strikes directly at Trump's identity as a New York real estate titan. Next comes Trump Tower's commercial core. The retail floors, the atrium, the office spaces. The court can appoint a receiver, essentially a government-installed CEO who takes over operations. Imagine a court-appointed lawyer walking into Trump Tower, removing Trump Organization management and redirecting every rent payment from luxury retailers straight to the state of New York. Trump would still technically own it, but control and cash flow would be gone. He would become a bystander in his own building. Then there is the Seven Springs estate in Westchester, the property central to the fraud case with inflated valuations. It is clean, easy to seize, and not his primary residence. After that come the bank accounts. The sheriff can issue levies to every major bank in New York. Any Trump organization account gets frozen and drained toward the judgment. If this hits during payroll, employees don't get paid, hotels stall, operations freeze. That is how companies collapse in days, not months. This is where the financial crisis mutates into a constitutional one. Trump Tower is not just a building, it is the private residence of the President of the United States. It is secured by the Secret Service. They control access, movement, and airspace. The sheriff has a court order to enter and inventory assets. What happens when a state officer walks up to Fifth Avenue with a seizure warrant and federal agents block the door? One side cites state law. The other cites national security and federal supremacy. That is a live standoff. This is why the Attorney General is likely starting with commercial entities rather than the penthouse itself. You don't need to enter the residence to seize the LLCs that own the assets, but the optics will be brutal. Imagine state officials placing seizure notices on luxury storefronts inside the president's own tower. It is financial humiliation designed to provoke reaction. If Trump orders the Secret Service to block lawful civil enforcement, he edges into obstruction territory. He will argue the state is trying to bankrupt the presidency itself, calling it a political coup. Inside the White House, sources describe the mood as explosive. To Trump, his wealth is his identity. His buildings are not investments. They are symbols of power. This feels to him like personal destruction. He is reportedly demanding the Department of Justice intervene, pushing a new legal theory that a sitting president is immune from civil asset seizure. The Supreme Court previously ruled presidents can be sued, but whether their businesses can be dismantled mid-presidency is untested territory. His lawyers will argue that seizing his empire interferes with executive function, that a president cannot run the country while worrying about his assets being auctioned off. But politically, this argument is toxic. Americans are watching retirement accounts fall from the Japan crisis. Inflation fears are rising. If Trump appears to be using presidential power to protect his personal fortune, the populist image collapses instantly. Normally, a billionaire facing a liquidity crunch calls wealthy friends, sovereign funds, hedge funds, or foreign investors and secures a short-term loan. But this is not a normal market. It is Saturday, January 24th, 2026, and global credit is frozen. Japanese banks are pulling money home. U.S. banks are terrified of regulatory scrutiny. Oil markets are unstable, and Trump is radioactive collateral. Lending $500 million to a president fighting courts and seizures is financial suicide. The judge knew this. That is why the immediate seizure order was lethal. It struck at the precise moment when Trump could not borrow, could not sell easily, and could not move cash. It was a perfectly timed financial decapitation. Among his base, this will look like theft. Expect protests, expect fundraising spikes, expect claims of socialism and persecution. But raising $464 million in small donations is nearly impossible. The real danger lies with independence. Trump's image has always been tied to wealth and competence, the idea that he was too rich to be controlled. Once his buildings are seized and his accounts frozen, that aura cracks. If he cannot manage his own bond, how can he manage the economy? Combined with market chaos and collapsing polls, this starts to resemble the fall of an administration. Big donors see it too. The financial elite does not back sinking ships. The quiet scramble for 2028 begins immediately. Figures like Dantis, Vance, and others will interpret this as the end of Trump's dominance. Ultimately, this fight lands at the Supreme Court. Trump's lawyers will seek an emergency stay. It will likely move quickly to the full bench. The conservative majority faces an impossible choice. Step in and block state seizures, and they look like partisan protectors. Refuse, and they allow the leader of their own party to be financially dismantled. With Trump's political numbers already collapsing, the court may decide he is no longer worth saving. Either way, the myth of invincibility is gone. But there is an even darker layer to this. Under New York law, judges can appoint receivers who fully take over seized assets. These receivers collect rents, run operations, fire staff, and sell properties if needed. Tenants are ordered to pay the state directly. Trump's children could be removed from payroll. The Trump Organization becomes a hollow shell that exists only to satisfy the judgment. It is a hostile takeover backed by court authority, and real estate does not exist in isolation. These buildings are tied to massive loans. Most commercial mortgages contain default clauses triggered by major judgments or seizures. Even if Trump is current on payments, the seizure itself can cause banks to call the loans immediately. That means lenders can demand hundreds of millions at once. When Trump cannot pay, banks foreclose on top of the state. The assets are ripped apart from both ends. In a collapsing market, there will be no mercy. Forced sales turn into fire sales. Properties once valued in the hundreds of millions could go for fractions. Private equity vultures and sovereign funds will circle. Trump could lose the buildings and still owe massive debt afterward. This is how empires evaporate. Now push this to its extreme. A president consumed by lawsuits, seizures, and financial panic while the global economy melts down, spending days with lawyers instead of military briefings. At what point does the cabinet question whether he can discharge the duties of office? The 25th Amendment suddenly stops sounding theoretical. If Trump attempted to use military force to interfere with courts or banks to protect his accounts, that would trigger a constitutional emergency. His personal survival would be in direct conflict with the legal system of the country. This is precisely what the founders feared. It is why emoluments rules exist, why blind trusts exist. Trump rejected all of it. Now the bill has arrived. If 40 Wall Street is sold in a forced market, its value could collapse. Commercial real estate is already struggling from remote work trends. Interest rates just surged from the Japan shock, and everyone knows this is a distressed sale. Buyers will offer pennies. The receiver may have no choice but to accept. Trump loses the building. The sale barely dents the judgment, and the debt remains. Foreign leaders are watching. In authoritarian systems, the idea of a local judge seizing a leader's palace is unthinkable. To them, this looks like American instability and weakness. It undermines the projection of power. If Trump cannot protect his own home, how can he project strength abroad? It emboldens rivals. Corporate leaders are watching too. Major international deals depend on confidence and stable leadership. When a president is fighting off asset seizures like a bankrupt tycoon, investment freezes, policy stalls, the presidency becomes paralyzed by personal crisis. Even the penthouse itself, the gold-plated symbol of Trump's identity, now hangs under legal threat. Every night he sleeps there, knowing it could soon belong to the state. For a man whose self-worth is tied to ownership and dominance, that psychological pressure is crushing. So understand what this moment represents. This is not celebrity drama. This is a stress test of the American system itself. Can the law reach the highest office? Can institutions survive the backlash? And can the economy withstand the collision of markets, politics, and personal collapse? We are in completely uncharted territory. The sheriff is at the door, the bond market is burning, and the president is cornered. History shows cornered leaders do not retreat calmly. The next move will not just be a post online. It may be an executive order, a constitutional showdown, or something far more volatile. This weekend is not just news, it is a turning point.